start talking then?
Yes, please.
I went to the actual phone itself.
I was sure, yeah.
Actually looking around.
It's difficult to wrangle reporters, as we see, because they're making news happen all the time. There's great things going on. I'm very loud. Yeah. I'm Doug Bradburn. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the director of the Washington Library here, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this special panel to discuss the nature of the presidential contest. I know that a lot of the teachers talked about some historical elections yesterday, and today is about the present, and everything in context is crucially important. I'm really looking forward to this. Reporters are not starstruck by politicians because they know not only are they just like us, in many cases they're worse than us, and they see them in all sorts of scenarios. So they ask tough questions and they don't get bossed around. They were telling me that when Justice Sotomayor and her people were here and they said, well, you can't share this picture that we just took, they would have said, what are you talking about? What do you mean? I don't work for you. I can do what I want. And I didn't say that to Justice Sotomayor. I said, yes, ma'am, whatever you say. So I like talking to these guys, and I think you're going to like it too. I want lots of good questions from everybody. I want to thank Julie Almasy and Jackie Jecka for putting together this fantastic thing. We're recording this. I think we're live streaming it. I want to see lots of tweets. All these guys' Twitter handles are on here. Let's blow this up. Let's make it happen. Come on, people. This is what I'm talking about. All right, so Jackie's going to introduce everybody because I don't know who any of them are. But Jonathan, I know, is going to do the moderation, and it's going to be fantastic. So let's do it. All right? How about a little slow clap? All right. Okay, please.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Welcome the Leadership Fellows to Teacher Days. We're really glad you're here. Panelists, welcome as well. The election of 2016 has so far been one of the most interesting in recent memory. While we see elections unfold in front of us through sound bites and viral videos, the process is often misunderstood. Today, we welcome a panel of experts who have experienced campaigns firsthand. Together, they bring years of experience within campaigns or reporting on political campaigns. Our moderator, Jonathan Martin, is currently the national political correspondent for the New York Times. Before joining the Times, he was a senior political writer for Politico. He is the co-author of The End of the Line, Romney v. Obama, the 34 Days That Decided the Election. He has also been published in publications such as the New Republic, National Journal, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. Joining Mr. Martin is Olivier Knox, the chief Washington correspondent for Yahoo News. His resume includes covering stories such as the impeachment of Bill Clinton, Al Gore's 2000 campaign, and covering the White House during the George W. Bush presidency. And you can ask him about that shoe incident. Steve Chigaris has been the senior political editor for CBS News since 2014. He was the political director for CBS News during the 2008 election, and he has covered Capitol Hill and was an embedded journalist on the John Kerry 2004 campaign. He has also worked at C-SPAN and WMUR in New Hampshire. Gillian Mulvey has helped 4 U.S. senators, 1 governor, 2 European heads of state, several U.S. congressmen, and dozens of other elected officials across America get elected. Most recently, he was the media consultant and ad maker for Bernie Sanders. In 2004, he won the Gold Polly for the best U.S. House TV ad of 2014. And Neil Newhouse, who is a partner and co-founder of Public Opinion Strategies, a leading Republican polling company specializing in national, political, and public affairs research. He was a lead pollster for Governor Mitt Romney's 2012 campaign and was recently named Pollster of the Year by the American Association of Political Consultants for 2015, which was the 3rd time he won this distinction. We are live streaming and recording this session, so it will be available on our website if you want to revisit it later. So we do ask if you have questions, wait for that microphone to get to you. So with that, please join me in welcoming our very accomplished panelists to Mount Vernon.
Well, thanks so much for having me and for having all of us. It's a treat to be here at Mount Vernon, the home of our first president. And I know that I've thought a few times during the course of this campaign about just what George Washington and the rest of his fellow presidents during the course of American history thought about this election. My goodness gracious. Lots to chew on today. Let me start with Neil with a sort of big question I'll just throw out there, and Neil, take it however you want. We see a lot of national polling that shows Trump clearly has a lead. I mean, I'm sorry, that Hillary clearly has a lead over him. That's Neil. I saw.
I passed the first test. Okay.
I saw a Fox survey yesterday that got me curious, and I checked, and it turns out that for at least a month, I think over a month, Donald Trump has not hit 40% on any ballot test, and the ballot test meaning the head-to-head number. Trump had not hit 40% on any ballot test since mid-May, where Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, is also included. But at the same time, Neil, we see a lot of state surveys of varying quality that show a somewhat closer race in battleground states that actually decide this election. We all get so consumed with national data and the head-to-head race, but obviously this campaign is probably decided in 10 or fewer states. So is this actually a race right now, Neil? I mean, can we just sort of take the rest of this panel off? I mean, is the campaign over before it started, or is this thing actually?
It's really a state-by-state electoral college. When I did the Romney campaign in 2012, we did literally hundreds of surveys. I didn't do a single national survey. Not one. Our country, our polling country, consisted of 8 states. Those are the 8 states we really cared about. The rest of the country didn't really make a difference. It didn't make a difference with the voters in New York City or in California. They're accounted for. They're going to go one way or the other. The voters in Mississippi. All we cared about was those 8 states. So when you look at the political environment right now, you really got to be looking at those state-by-state surveys. And here's the problem with that. The problem with that is the polling done at the state level is not nearly the quality of polling done on the national level. And it's not, you don't get as many good statewide surveys as you do national surveys. So number one is try not to pay attention to national surveys as much, although we will. Secondly is, I think there's a lot of, obviously there's a ton of stuff going on right now that I would say that given over the past month, Donald Trump's pivot to the general election hasn't quite worked out as well as hoped.
So-called pivot.
And
waiting for pivots like the new waiting for Godot.
And I think you're not really going to know where this election is until after convention. I think we're waiting to convention to really see how things settle out. But you look at the data right now.
Yeah.
New York Times, Washington Post, NBC, even the Fox News poll did interview people other than Republicans. No. What's really interesting is Donald Trump wins on the issue of change. He is the one who could more effective in bring change to Washington, and yet Hillary wins on experience and being less risky. And I think if there's a leverage point in this election, it's going to be leverage point between change and risk.
Now, your firm worked for Bernie Sanders, and you guys know very well just how powerful a current that the change issue is in this election. We saw it in the Democratic primary, Lord knows we saw it in the Republican primary. And nothing says change more than Donald Trump and status quo. Is it risky for Hillary Clinton to run more of a steady hand at the Tiller campaign in this environment? I mean, is that a questionable posture given the unmistakable hunger for changing status quo?
I think she has to. She's running the campaign that she can run, and to distance herself too far from Washington for the last 25 years becomes very difficult for voters to buy. What she can do, however, is talk about her experience and that steady hand, and there's such a strong contrast with her opponent, and that's what you want in a campaign. You want to take your strengths and match them up to your opponent's weaknesses. And Donald Trump, on a sort of daily or hourly basis, who's outpacing the news cycle through tweets and so forth, is handing the Hillary Clinton campaign just ammunition on an almost hourly basis. And so if you're Paul Manafort, who's a very, very smart guy, very experienced guy. You're looking at this map now, and you're trying to you've got to let Trump be Trump, because you're trying to manage the situation, and it's getting very bleak, I think, for Republicans. Is the race over? No. But is it very, very difficult right now? Yes, it is. And the states that are going to decide this race, right now, I think 6 out of 7 of them, of the same swing states, Hillary Clinton's leading, and Democrats are looking to expand potentially into states like Arizona, make Arizona very competitive, make Missouri very competitive, so they can grow the map, so to speak. This is really great news for Hillary Clinton because she does not have a good change message. We found that out, obviously, in the Sanders campaign. She has very strong attributes. She's very well liked by Democrats. And again, when you have an opponent who is doing such damage to themselves and their own change message, it gives you.
All right, Steve, let me just ask you bluntly. Is Donald Trump the only candidate who could have lost to Hillary Clinton this year?
The only candidate to have lost to Hillary Clinton this year?
Is Donald Trump the only candidate who could have lost to Hillary Clinton this year?
Of the Republicans?
Yes.
I think a lot of them could have lost. They
Yeah.
all lost to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
You think Ted Cruz would have had a better shot at Hillary Clinton? I don't know. I mean, the question is, and just to point to Hugh, to what Neil said, we don't know if this is going to be a change election yet or a status quo election, right? We do know that there are parts of both parties that really want to change. It seemed to be more so in the Republican Party than the Democratic Party, as we saw the result. So what happens here? You have Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, like you, and a lot of Democratic leaders out there painting Trump as somebody who's unfit and doesn't have the temperament to be president. Is that going to trump, no pun intended, the change argument that Trump has been putting out there? That's what we're going to, I think, find out as we get closer to September, October.
And Olivia, somebody told me, and I won't go who, but because it was a pretty good line in terms of a Democrat who wanted to offend Hillary, that this is kind of a cosmic justice for her, because in 2008, the only person that probably could have beaten her, and it does seem like the Democrats have gotten a gift handed to them this year.
Yeah, I like to say that if the Clintons had a family crest, like the way nobles do, then the inscription on the bottom would be whatever the Latin is for "blessed by my enemies." They consistently luck out.
It's incredible.
And I think to the question you asked Steve about whether Trump was the only one who could lose one, let's not assume away 5 months of campaigning. That's dangerous, to say nothing of 5 months of world events. That's always dangerous. I will co-sign that national polls are garbage as much time as we spend on them. No, I think she was lucky. I don't know about cosmic justice. That seems to be a little too spiritual for me. I'm a little more cynical than that. But we can all game out. Sort of, this has been harder with a Ted Cruz. Would have been harder with one of the governors. Would have been harder with someone else in the field. I don't know. I don't know what we're going to see in the next 5 months. I do think you can make a good argument that the strategy that got Donald Trump through the primaries with a record number of votes is not a strategy that's going to get him to victory in November.
And just to stay with the two journalists up here, because this is something we talk about, I think about all the time, and I think the folks here would appreciate it, hearing about this. But just talk guys, for a second, both of you, about just how strikingly different the experience of covering Trump and covering Clinton is, because one of them is so improvisational, it's so seat of the pants, impulsive even, and the other could not be more cautious, careful at times, even calculating. Just in terms of the process of trying to interview them, of trying to get comments from them, just talk about how different it is.
Well, I'll start and just say, first of all, Hillary Clinton is one of the most vetted candidates I think we've ever had, right? And Trump has never done this before. So from that standpoint, every day is a treasure with Donald Trump. Because he's either saying something or we're learning something new about his background. Hillary Clinton is really, unless she's making news on a daily basis, we know everything there is to know.
He's constantly saying stuff too, right?
Constantly. Right? That's the other difference is, for us as journalists, he is not shy in terms of talking to journalists, and it's been more to Fox recently. Like, he does sit down with CBS, he does sit down with the networks, talks to a lot of newspaper reporters. He's constantly seems on the phone with the Times and the Post, and every time I look up, he's talking to a newspaper in an interview with the New York Times. So he is one of maybe the most accessible presidential candidates in some ways. Whether that's a great strategy or not, that's not for me to decide. We're just happy to have the access.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, I mean, we never have any access to her. Very rarely talks to the press. We might get a sit-down interview with her once every 6 months or 3 months. And so from that standpoint, it's a much more difficult campaign to cover. The other part of it is the structures of their campaigns. Hillary Clinton does have more people that interact with the press, but they're not necessarily very forthcoming. The Trump people, small operation, not forthcoming at all. So it's strange. I was talking to somebody the other day about the deep stakes and how this is the period now where everybody's getting all lathered up about who's the vice president, who's the running mate going to be for each campaign. And normally there's leaks, and normally there's reporting to be done. This is almost like this is the hardest deep stakes I think I can remember, because they've kept both Trump and Clinton have kept it so close to the candidate and to a very small group of people that know anything that's going on with this process.
Well, and Trump is not excited about the deep state story because it's about somebody else, right? I mean, he doesn't want to get, his number two getting attention. That's sort of the job of the top of the ticket, right? I mean, Olivier, this is what, your fifth cycle that you covered? Your presidential?
Well, I covered, I actually covered the physical campaign in 2000, 2004. I was at the White House in 2008, and I covered the campaign in 2012. And I float in between those two worlds of the White House in D.C. and then the trail.
So, how tough is it to sort of do the job when one person is flooding with access and the other person is, basically holding all access?
Well, if you wrote this campaign up as a novel, no one would believe you. I mean, people would say, like, "Oh, ridiculous! How amazing is it that you have this one, force of nature candidate who is the animating message of his campaign, and his aides hide basically from the press, and this other candidate who doesn't really have a great core rationale for why she wants to be president. But boy, if you ask the campaign a question, you get an answer in 5 minutes. It's very, very different. If I ask the Trump campaign what his plan is, to show me the best, most detailed explanation of his plan to fight the Islamic State. Crickets. Total crickets. They don't even forward me, like, well, here's the speech, here's the website part, nothing. Crickets. You ask the Hillary folks, and they're like, wait, but you're the retired general. If you wrote this as a novel, no one would believe you because they are they're playing the types on it.
Hey, but you know what? Part of the issue is, and I'm not involved, I did the Jeb Bush super PAC, so we were extraordinarily successful in spending $120 million on doing 4 delegates. But Donald Trump, it's a typical businessman kind of campaign. He's running his own race. He is the campaign manager. And so when you make those requests, everything I get the sense that goes through him and asks. And that bottlenecks the campaign. It's great.
Yeah, he is the message.
Yeah. So this is the powerful country in the world. There are 2 major parties. One of the major parties' nominees is his own press secretary. Think about the amount of press inquiries that he gets on a daily basis from American and international journalists. And then think about the fact that the candidate himself is looking at and vetting many of those requests. I mean, that's extraordinary. We just don't see that very often. Real fast, for the two of you guys, the professionals up here, there's been a lot of talk about Brexit, obviously, in the last week. And that has sort of led to a flow of stories about what is the unavoidable, and that is what John Edwards had famously called the 2 Americas. John Edwards didn't leave a lot of legacies for us to talk about in this company, at least, but certainly the 2 Americas was one of them. And if you look at the polling data from the Brexit vote, it does mirror a lot of the divisions that we're seeing in this country. And I guess my question is this issue of working class white Americans increasingly siding with Republicans and the more affluent people in this country, the so-called winners of this economy, increasingly being comfortable with Democrats. Is that a phenomenon that's here to stay? Is that the new realignment, or is that a product mostly of an exceptional moment and
exceptional
I
Monday.
don't see it as partisan. I see a direct parallel between what Bernie Sanders is doing on the left and what Donald Trump is doing on the right. And it speaks to a point I've tried to make for a while now, which is the mood of the country is as negative as it's ever been. We asked the question, do you think the country's generally heading in the right direction, or is it pretty seriously off the wrong track? It's kind of like the Dow Jones Industrial Average of politics. When Americans think things are going well, they re-elect incumbents. They think things are going poorly, they kick them out of office. It's been 150 straight months where a plurality of Americans say the country's off the wrong track. That is 12 years. Longest period of sustained pessimism in a generation in this country. And you saw Bernie Sanders tap into that kind of that middle class angst on the left, and Donald Trump doing the same thing on the right. I think they're very similar, actually, in their appeal to voters. But I think it's real. I think there's a hollowing out of the middle class in this country that politicians in D.C. haven't been able to address.
But has the six-figure college degree, post-college or voter the Democratic Party, or is that going to change that?
I've always, if you look at the data going back for years, really, Republicans do well among some college and college grads and don't do as well among post grads, which is the argument that too much education would be a bad thing. But I don't, it's a moment in time right now. I'm not sure if people will.
There was an interesting moment a few months back when a hedge fund, a Wall Street manager, the guy who was the genesis of the Gordon Gekko character of Wall Street, came out for Bernie Sanders, and he was on CNBC. Bernie Sanders, they were like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, listen, 80% of Americans have been in a recession for the last 15 years. And the CNBC panel started laughing. They're like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, 80% of Americans have been in a recession because they haven't had a pay raise. Their wages have been flat. And the CNBC panel were just, they sort of couldn't compute this because the models show that, well, America technically hasn't been in a recession for 15 years and so forth. One of the big, I think, one of the big central messages of Bernie's campaign was, what happens to the middle class if the next 40 years is like the last 40 years? And our primary message was the economy is rigged since most new wealth at the top is held in place by a corrupt system of campaign finance that's paid for by Wall Street banks and billionaires. And so that message speaks to a lot of America because they know it and they feel it. They're like, there's just an aha moment where they know they're having you can argue about the details, but for a lot of people that just rings very true. And we saw it see it here, and we're seeing it in England and other European countries that are dealing with these economic issues.
To give you an idea, I mean, a year and a half ago, Bernie Sanders was an asterisk.
We were not even put on polls, which was very annoying. It was like, I thought to myself, we're clearly running. Stop testing Elizabeth Warren.
April 2015, just over April 2015, CNN did a poll, Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders, 69-5. Hell, I could have been 5. 69-5, and basically ended up being a dead heat toward the end. It's just, it was Bernie Sanders' message that really resonated with voters, and I think it was only because of Hillary Clinton's organization, the amount of money she spent, just her field operation, et cetera, to help pull her through. But that was as significant a challenge on the Democratic side as Donald Trump was on the Republican side.
Yet, if you took every major Wall Street institution, they would overwhelmingly support the Democratic nominee this time around. So there is the sort of real angst that is taking place in this country, but yet the Democratic Party, typically the party of labor and working class, is now increasingly appealing to upscale voters. And the Republican Party, typically, historically, the party of capital in this country, is now animated by a downscale base that's largely white, and that is increasingly moving away from free market principles. and it's responsive to the kind of identity politics that we haven't seen. Are those patterns here to stay, or do Democrats move back working class voters after the Clintons pass the seat?
That's an interesting, fascinating question, and obviously there are lots of fault lines and happening in both parties right now. One of the reasons I think that Bernie's message is at the moment right now, and one of the, I think that he will have a great impact that lasts beyond the cycle because he's talking to the future, and his issues are where the future of the party is. And you see that a lot with the enormous majorities we got with young voters. When you look down the road, I think the vision of the Democratic Party is probably more in line with Bernie's than with the Clintons, with Hillary Clinton's. And so to that end, if you're a Democrat running for office, maybe next cycle and the cycle beyond that, for the first time, maybe talking about debt-free college or free college in ways that was unthinkable as recently as last cycle, and talking about $15 minimum wage. You may be against fracking, and you may be against some of these trade deals. So that's definitely, I think the future is probably moving back towards that middle, and making sure that there's a fair shot for the middle class.
So we're going to do some Q&A, but first, I want to ask Steve and Olivier to tell people here who are kind of watching at home in this election, where should they be watching? So we've got about 4 months left here before Election Day. You've heard the caveat emptor when it comes to national polls. So what states should people be watching? And is the map this time around going to be different than it has been in the kind of red and blue America that we're so familiar with?
I think it depends on who you ask, and this is one thing to watch for. Will the Democrats change, the Republicans change? I think that all depends on what happens in November. If Pennsylvania flips to Donald Trump, if Michigan flips to Donald Trump, that's going to really change what message the Democrats are going to be sending in 2020. If it's along the lines that we've seen, then maybe not. Maybe it doesn't go further, right? So I think, I don't know. One thing I caution everybody, including myself, who's covered this for now 2095. Exactly. Is that we are looking at this election through using the norms that have happened in previous years through the prism of previous elections. And I think there's a lot of evidence that might not be the case this year. I'm not saying it definitely won't be, but there's definitely a lot of evidence it might not be. So to look at these campaigns through the eyes of, they don't, Trump doesn't have the ground game or the organization, or these messages they're sending on the Democratic side and the Republican side are different. We just can't look back and say, well, what happened before is what's going to happen this year. This is definitely, there's something happening. I'm not sure we all know what is going to happen, but I think to say, well, in the past, it happened this way, so it's going to happen this way in 2016. I don't think that's the case. I think we all just need to be very, very careful when people point to, well, Trump doesn't have the organization, so there's no way he can win. Well, he didn't have much of an organization in the primaries, and a lot of heads exploded in Washington when he wound up winning New Hampshire and then ultimately the nomination. And so I just think we have to be cautious over the next 4 months and just sort of really get a sense of where voters outside of Washington, outside of New York City, outside of Northeast, outside of coasts are, because I think they're going to dictate a lot of not only what happens this year, but what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. I basically agree with what Steve said. I think there are a couple of things to watch for. One, so let's agree national polls are garbage just to start out. Unless you see a lopsided, like 90-10, they don't tell you much. The gaffe coverage doesn't mean very much. There's not really a ton of evidence that even the stuff that we talk about on cable every couple of days, there's not a ton of evidence that that's ever really shaped a race. I think that there are two universes of states to look at. One is the traditional battlegrounds, the Ohio's, maybe Detroit, the Pennsylvania's, maybe Utah. But also the second family of states are the ones that shouldn't be in play but appear. And by that I mean Arizona, Utah, places like that, where Trump seems to be in trouble. You got to watch both of these families of states week in, week out through the election. I can't predict based on what we're seeing now what's going to happen. But those are the two things that I would look at most.
And you mentioned Arizona and Utah, and that kind of brings me to the unique nature of this election. I mean, those are typically GOP locks, especially Utah. How have we gotten to a point where a Republican nominee for president might have to go to Utah to campaign? I mean, battleground Provo, who does he come from?
You don't think of BYU being the battleground. It's extraordinary. Part of it is the LDS influence, obviously, in Utah.
Mormon church, right?
And it is, that Romney is still extremely popular there, and I think voters there are just really kind of traditionally morally conservative in a way that they question Donald Trump. I mean, he's got a tougher case to make. The race may be close here, but not because they're level. I did a survey the other day in Southwest Ohio. Hillary Clinton's unfavorable was 69%. I've just never seen numbers like that. The two most unpopular presidential nominees in the history of polling are against each other.
Well, I think we can't underestimate, because everybody talks about Trump's unfavorables, we can't underestimate Clinton's unfavorables. They're sky high, and if she was running against somebody else, she would have higher unfavorables and have the highest visit, right? So we've got to, that has to be, I think, emphasized, that this isn't going to be a cakewalk for Hillary Clinton, I think, because of that reason.
Let me throw one caveat about this whole change versus stability election. I'm not aware of a Republican candidate, incumbent candidate who lost a primary this year at the House level.
There have been a handful, but they have been because they were placed in districts with other incumbents.
Right. So we talk about the Trump phenomenon. We got to be really careful with this because
there's not some wave that's taking the incumbent governors.
And you've seen these polls before on other issues, right? Like if you ask people about American education, they'll say terrible. What about your school? Our school's great. And you see a lot of this with governors and with House members too. Like, oh, we got to change everything. What about your congressman? No, we're keeping our congressman.
Let me just pull the camera back for a minute and ask all four of you a question that I'm very curious about. And that is, for most of the last 40 years, our politics were driven by sort of culture wars, leftover 60s fights. The baby boomers in this room sort of gifted us with these ongoing divisions, largely over issues of sexual morality, abortion, gay rights, those kinds of things. And that's what divided the two parties oftentimes. You don't hear Trump talking about those kinds of cultural war issues. What you do hear now more is talk of sovereignty, control of our own country, much more identity and nationalism. Frankly, it's more European than it is sort of the kind of post-60s fights that we're used to. And I guess my question is, I mean, are we now moving to a point where the divisions in this country are over identity and nationalism and less over, sort of sexual mores?
I'll jump in. I think the millennial generation is settling that debate. It's two generations down from the boomers, and the numbers on those issues, on issue after issue, is just overwhelmingly, I would say, in favor of tolerance and justice and so forth. And so those issues are slowly being settled, if not by the Supreme Court, we saw the other day, and by millennials moving forward.
You have a Republican nominee who was glad on foreign soil to celebrate one country leaving the EU and basically doing victory lap, saying, I call it. But yet, that same nominee, it's done 3 days after the most important abortion decision handed down by the Supreme Court in a quarter of a century, has not said a word about that decision. What does that tell us about where our politics are now?
Well, it tells you where Donald Trump is. if you look at attitudes on...
But the base doesn't seem to care, do they?
Yeah, they do, I mean, they do care, but they're willing to forgive him for this right now.
Who's Hillary?
Yeah, it is. Attitudes in the country have changed dramatically on issues like gay marriage, issues like marijuana. But they really haven't changed in pro-life issues.
Abortion still pretty bad.
Those numbers are pretty flat because for many Americans, it's a life and death issue, and you see the numbers change on the gay marriage is, those numbers are dramatically changing. And exactly right. Millennials, it's a done issue for young people. But the pro-life hasn't changed. I thought it was very interesting the other day that it seemed to me Donald Trump adopted Bernie Sanders' language on the Review Project. I
I thought it was dead with Bernie Sanders. Or what was his name? Brian. The trade speech you mean in Pennsylvania? And that was further to the left than the Democrats. Right?
That's
What further to the left?
But he also finally gave us what I've always said is his animating message, which is you've been betrayed.
Yeah.
And he finally gave us an explicit version of that, saying Hillary will betray you again.
I mean,
This plays into what Neil said earlier, is the pessimism, right? You said 150 straight months of pessimism. I think it's just snowballed to the point where Americans, and I think this is what Sanders tapped into, this is what Trump tapped into, is it's basically Americans are really upset. And the way I mean, there's something brilliant about the America Great Again slogan in the sense that that is playing into that pessimism.
And does that grievance, that pessimism, Steve, as you call it, does that alleviate tempt politicians in America today to embrace a much more European-style, blood and soil kind of nationalism that can lead pretty quickly to, let's be honest, xenophobia and nativism?
And I don't know if we have evidence of that yet. We'll see in November, right? If Trump wins, I think that'll be your evidence, right? But right now, in the Republican Party, it seemed to be that was the message that resonated with Republicans. But do we know that in a general election that's going to be the case?
But if you combine that with the concern about immigration and the threat of terrorism, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you combine those together, yeah, you can see it in that.
I have a question. Can I ask you a question, Neil?
Yeah.
So I'm half French. I know something of the French political system. And one of the things that happened in the 1980s when the National Front rose was that the polls consistently underestimated where Marine Le Pen was going to perform because there was a sort of a shame attached to being part of what was obviously a race-based rejection of immigration and the rest of it. In the polling today, are we seeing any similar impact of underestimating Trump's support because of people? I always tell people when you look at a poll, that's what people tell pollsters they believe. If you see a news headline that says poll Americans believe X, that's garbage. Americans say they believe. And so are we seeing any evidence that the polls are underestimating the Trump support?
You are, and you saw that, especially in the primaries. The primaries, there were studies done that, you have two ways of calling people on the phone. Live interview, where you have a live person on the phone, and then you have the second way, which is like a robocall. You just kind of press a button. And what they found was the robocalls recorded 3 or 4 points higher for Donald Trump than a live interview. That's number one. Secondly, how many of you know somebody who's supporting Donald Trump? Right. If you go to cocktail parties, I don't think any of our friends will ever admit they're voting for Donald Trump, but Donald Trump is right now, and that cost polling point I guess, Donald Trump's winning white voters in this country by 14 points. Now, the country is only, it's 70%, Caucasian, but he's winning white voters by 14 points across the country. Think about that in terms of what that means in voters and support. So I think some say it may be underestimated. I think there's a reluctance for people to actually say they're voting for him because they don't think it's politically, socially acceptable. So I think you could see that in there.
Do you think that there were reports out this week that he at this point in time is behind Mitt Romney at the same point in time, in 2012. Do you think that difference is made up right there, or is he further behind where Romney was at this point?
Well, don't get me started now. Mitt and Obama were actually pretty much tied 4 years ago. Right now, we love it. People ask me, what would you do differently in the Romney campaign? And we lost that campaign, not at convention with Clint Eastwood, not with 47%. We lost that campaign, I think, to some extent, from May through July or August, when the Clinton campaign the Obama campaign unloaded on us in those 8 targeted states with negative.
Right now, though.
Exactly. And that's the advantage that, although, you know what? Their attacks have been kind of unanswered by us to some extent. Not totally. I mean, we answered, we did stuff. But Trump he's in a, they may not be doing TV advertising, but he's an extraordinarily effective communicator. And he's still getting his message out.
Well, he's picking fights every other day with his own party.
And that speaks to the lack of a pivot. Okay.
Still waiting for pivot. Okay, so all right, all 4 of you, let's go and let's do some Q&A from the audience. Because 'tis the season, it's almost July 1st, and you know what that means, the sweepstakes. Steve mentioned this. The Trump phenomenon has been so overwhelming. It's like a full eclipse, it's like blocking out everything. That this time of year in most campaigns, you would see the most fevered, reckless, irresponsible speculation about who the VP was going to be. Now, why is that? Because us journalists get bored. We got to fill column inches between the primaries and the convention with something. So we've engaged in just exactly who the number 2 was going to be, even though we knew they would probably have very little impact ultimately on the election, which is decided by larger economic forces and the 2 nominees. All that aside, we are getting closer to that bewitching hour. So let me start at the end with Olivier.
Oh, sure.
Trump, Hillary. Given what we know about where they are in the polling, given what we know about what states are going to be crucial, who do they go with?
Well, it depends on how quickly
You're on the spot.
For Trump, it depends on how quickly the cloning lab in Colorado it turns out another Trump. The interesting thing about the Trump sweepstakes is that he has at times sort of talked about what qualities he wants, and he's talked about wanting someone in the establishment and wanting someone who could be a bridge to the rest of the party, to Congress, and to the rest of it, which is kind of striking. You sort of his brand is the opposite. I don't know. The question is who would want that job? There's been speculation that Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, I don't see him as he's someone who, by the way, also likes to put his name on buildings. So I don't think he would be a
smaller building.
But he would, yeah, they are. But he would not be. I don't see him as a number 2. He would need to get Trump to agree to fundamentally recast the role of vice president and the role of vice presidency. This is a long way of saying I don't really have any answer on the Trump side of things. On the Hillary side of things, I was fair.
You got to pick some.
All right, give us a name, Olivia.
Neil is going to be Trump's.
Pass, you got it.
That may be divorced for me, I think.
You're going to love it.
And then on the Hillary side, I was talking to Steve about this before we came out, and I'm coming around on the Elizabeth Warren as Hillary's running mate. And the reason I'm coming around, I've always thought Kane would be.
A lot of murmurs in the room.
Right, so I initially started out thinking, Senator Kane of Virginia, he's got a good state, he's a governor, he's good on foreign policy, he can speak Spanish, he's got, he's an affable guy, right? And then I started to ask myself, so what are Hillary's problems, right? Let's see, people don't really trust her, people don't think she cares about them, people don't think she's a change agent. What happens if you bring Elizabeth Warren on? What if Elizabeth Warren is out there making the case that Hillary actually is a change agent, that she does care about you, and that she can be trusted? Warren's also shown that she can really take it to Donald Trump. I'm coming around. I didn't think it was going to happen. I honestly did. Like, if you'd asked me last week, I would have said, no chance. They hate each other. They hate each other. I've overheard Warren say things about Hillary Clinton. Like, I know they don't like each other. I'm coming around on the idea because of the way it addresses a lot of Hillary's vulnerabilities in a way that I don't think Kane does.
All right, real fast. My counter to why it won't be Elizabeth Warren. Number one, if this race does not tighten, then Secretary Clinton is not going to need somebody like Elizabeth Warren to make it a sure thing, because it will already be a sure thing. Number two, it's a governing question. Why would the Clintons want a rival power center in the White House who could overshadow Bill and Hillary? That seems questionable. And number three, from a campaign perspective, if Hillary has got to improve her numbers among white men to get a baseline minimum there so that she can survive any kind of onslaught in the Pennsylvanias and Michigans, then how does Warren help the cause with white men? That said, I still think it's possible that it's Warren. I just think, unless, to put it in football terms, unless Hillary has to put the ball in the air, why wouldn't she? All right.
So
Steve.
just to counter the white man part of this,
Oh, all right.
I think the
Push
risk,
back to the pushback.
Well, no, I think the risk is that the thinking is she might hurt with white men if there are a few women on the ticket, right? That's I'm not something I think. I'm just saying that's what he's saying. But I don't think any of the others necessarily help her with white men. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's that. So but I might be overthinking.
Give me your picks now.
I'm
attacking the moderator.
You're the establishment, Kmart.
I've been leading Warren for a while.
Cut your mic.
I've been leading Warren for a while for a couple of reasons. One, because very early on, I was told by many people in the Clinton campaign that one of the top criteria that they're looking at is we need somebody who's going to take it to Trump. We don't want Hillary Clinton to get in and let Trump. We want Hillary to do that. And then all of a sudden, a few weeks ago, Elizabeth Warren comes out there and just hammering Trump, right? So there was one. Two, who are the people involved in the selection for Hillary Clinton? John Podesta, Bill Clinton. Let's think back to who Bill Clinton picked as his running mate. And it wasn't about filling blanks. It was actually about emphasizing Bill Clinton's
Al Gore.
strengths,
Those I forgot.
I mean, think about it. Another Southern guy, another youngish guy, right? It was one of these things where you sort of emphasized the top of the ticket. And they ran together and they're like, wow, that was brilliant. What a great.
It was counterintuitive because the conventional wisdom is that you pick somebody who would compliment you by sort of bringing to the table what you lack. In fact, Gore was a doubling down on what something already had.
Going back to my idea of the norms may not be in play this year. Anyway, so I don't know. Of all the people on the list,
You didn't Warren makes sense.
I think Warren makes sense.
All right, how
I definitely don't think it's going to be Tom Perez.
I'll
I'll tell you that right now. I will.
Tom Perez, Secretary of Labor, for those who are.
If Tom Perez, the Labor Secretary, is over there. But on the Trump side, I don't know how I would prepare it. But I would leave it. I don't know on the Trump side. I really don't. I mean, the names. What do you got? You got Gingrich. You got Christie. You got Corker.
Mary Fallon, governor of Oklahoma.
Mary Fallon.
Scott Brown, former senator.
See, so that's the sort of that is the one. That's the name I was going to say. Scott Brown is. Does anybody know who Scott Brown is? He's the
Former
guy
senator from
that Elizabeth Warren beat to become senator, right? And he's just sort of been keeping his powder dry for the last couple of years, waiting for the next thing.
But you will narrow it down beyond this.
If I had to pick, do Gingrich.
Okay, dude, next.
All right.
So I think Elizabeth Warren would be a wonderful choice for the reasons that
3 Warrens here. My God.
laid out. But I'm actually going to go with Tim Kaine, and she'll name him on the last day of the Republican convention or on that Saturday. I think Tim Kaine's going to be, he's obviously from Virginia, he speaks Spanish. He's got a great story. He was a governor, he's got executive experience, he was lieutenant governor, and knows how to be a good soldier. And I think those are all qualities that are going to be very important to the Hillary campaign. On the Republican side, I'm going to double down on Trump, and so pick Christie. And I think that would just double the brand's
2 mild-mannered guys from Northeast, right? All right, so Christie and Kaine. All right, Neil, you're at last.
Yeah.
Oh, then you have to go through.
So for Hillary, she should go high risk. I think Elizabeth Warren's riskier. I think having 2 of them in the ticket does drive white men away. I think it's likely should be overshadowed. I've been saying for months she needs to build more and more white guy. And that's Tim Kaine. I mean, it's like, nothing. I mean, Tim Kaine is the perfect choice. I mean, he is from Virginia, swing state, speaks Spanish. It's just, he's the good choice. I think he's the guy. It would have been Sherrod Brown, but if Sherrod Brown would win with Hillary, that means John Kasich, the Republican governor of Iowa, would appoint the next senator, and they go Republican, which could tilt the Senate. So I think Sherrod's coming out. On the Republican side, I love the comment I think Steve made, or Lydia, about Tony. I've been saying for the longest period of time, after much consideration, I think Donald Trump's going to pick himself.
Maybe Ivanka.
Exactly.
Yeah, the golden choice makes sense. Beyond that,
Trump.
yeah. Beyond that, there is no, and as you can tell from the crew here, there's no sense for which direction he's going to head. So I go with the hostage scene. I go with Chris Christie.
And even with all of the leaks that we always see about vice president, with Trump, who the heck knows if the leaks are real? And I mean, we're not going to know until we see the smoke come from Trump Tower, right?
Is that how it's going to be revealed?
It's coming out
Very loud.
Right down the escalator. Or the smoke from the Trump Twitter feed, I guess, these days. All right. I will step forward here, even though I'm supposed to be a neutral moderator. And I will say on the Republican side, again, who the heck knows? But I think Trump, if he does not want to be foreshadowed in the least, I think he would pick somebody who is less well known. I think somebody like Mary Fallon, who is the tutor governor of Oklahoma, has governing experience, is from the heartland. But I think if Trump wants somebody who he thinks is kind of his Trumpian global stature, and you look at the people who would do it, you get Christie. And also, you trust Christie too, have a relationship. Trump's big on loyalty. Who was the first person to step forward from the establishment wing of the party to endorse Trump before it was cool? It was country before it was cool. It was Christie. He caught a lot of hell for it too. I can see Christie. On the Democratic side, we are here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and long known as the mother of presidents. The mother has been barren for a very long time. We claim Woodrow Wilson, even though he had a brief fling with New Jersey voters. But he was born in Stanton and grew up for part of his childhood. But it's been a long time, and I think Tim Kaine is going to break that streak, at least be on the ticket. And I think he makes sense for all the reasons we haven't laid out here. If for some reason that it's not Kaine, my guess is to try to find help with white male voters. And to do that, Tom Vilsack is a name that I've heard, who's the former governor of Iowa, who's been ag secretary for the last 8 years, who has roots in Pittsburgh, very humble roots, very close to the Clintons. They trust the Vilsacks, solid, sober, steady, safe pick. And I still think Sherrod Brown is still a possibility. Again, if she feels like she really needs help in the Rust Belt, then I think Sherrod could do that. Really appeal to downscale voters, working class voters. But the problem there is if you feel like you're going to win the presidency and you want to ensure that you get a Democratic Senate, you risk doing that because you lose that seat. One facet about Kaine, too, obviously the governor here in Virginia is a Democrat, Terry McAuliffe, but because of the off-year elections in this state, if you do pick Kaine and the Democrats do win, that seat would be up in 2017, not 2018. So you only have a guaranteed Democratic seat for a year until you had to sort of come back up again in the fall of 17. So it's not the risk that Sherrod Brown where you lose that seat immediately, but it's only a year's release. So that's my safe conventional wisdom pick, Christie and Kate. With that, let's open it up for some questions from the audience. Anybody up here?
So with two unfavorable candidates right now, is there any place for third-party candidates in this election?
Wait for the mics. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was about with two unfavorable candidates in this election. Is there a place for a third-party candidate?
Yeah, absolutely. 6 months ago.
Right.
It's too late. Not going to happen. That time has passed.
Do you think that they could do nothing, Neil, and they'd still, eke into high single digits? Gary Johnson and...
That's a question, actually. Will we see a third-party candidate at a debate for the first time in 25 years?
I don't think there's a chance.
I don't think so. You have to get 15% and a handful of respective national polls, 15% to be on the debate stage. You guys all think Johnson can do it?
I don't know. I think it's going to be close. I think this would be a great year for Gary Johnson. I think
Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico, who is now the Libertarian nominee running with Bill Will.
And it has one major advantage over any other hypothetical, which is that they're actually on the ballot in a bunch of states, which is the biggest problem with any independent run. Is that if you, the system is designed.
But if they get in the debates, do you think they can be a factor, Steve?
If they get into the debate.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. I mean, you saw it happen across the road in '92. He was the last third person on stage, and got 19%.
What a known fact.
It makes noise if he gets on the stage. The question is, how does he get to 15% between now and September? I don't see that happen.
Yeah.
And because the Libertarian candidate in Ohio in 2014 performed so poorly, the Libertarian Party is not on the ballot in Ohio in 2016.
But you don't even need to get to 15%. You just need to get to 4%. And if it comes out of your party, then they did tremendous damage.
That's Ralph Nader.
Exactly.
In the election, on the debate stage.
Right. But down the road.
Right. Well, Ralph Nader actually only had 1.6% in Florida. Remember, that's where you made it in. 1.6%.
Right, and that made a little difference. And then you have to adjust your resources. Ralph Nader made it difficult for Gore and places like Wisconsin. So then you have to shift resources over to what should have been a state because he's picking up 5% or so. So the answer is yes, it can have a huge impact, even if their numbers are very small.
And by the way, the question about Gary Johnson, did you inhale? The answer is yes. He did inhale. He still is inhaling, actually. No, in all seriousness, his trademark is marijuana legalization. And he is a unapologetic recreational user himself. Well, I think he said he hasn't.
He said he hasn't done it
in a few weeks.
Yeah.
A few weeks.
Not smoking in the White House, right?
Yes.
I'm not. There may have been a Truman balcony carve-out.
We think Camp David is.
All right. It can't be Gary Johnson without some good pot jokes. I mean, it's tough.
So you were talking about how you think this election, a lot of it's coming down to nationalism versus the culture wars. But something that I've noticed is that there have been a lot of culture wars going on in the state level. You see the laws in Indiana.
Bathroom laws.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you think the culture wars are still happening? Obviously this is a conservative backlash. Do you think that with the national government where it is right now, that there can be anything to combat those?
There's no question that there are still sort of post-60s battles taking place. It's just that it does feel like other issues have superseded those questions this time around that owe more to identity and kind of nationalism than sexual culture, which is obviously still being hotly debated, just like in North Carolina. But these sort of larger questions seem to be taking hold that are even closer to the bone when you talk about race and ethnicity in this country. That you see much more central this time around, in part because you haven't had a Republican nominee who was willing to run in such a sort of open, unapologetic fashion about talking about kind of grievance and resentment towards minorities. Just we haven't seen it in this country.
But we're going to see a lot more of these cultural war questions for one very simple reason, which is the vacancy on the Supreme Court. So we're going to see the abortion stuff's going to come back, the religious liberty argument, which, by the way, Donald Trump goes before 1,000 evangelical leaders and talks to them in terms of religious liberty based on the standing ovation. It's obviously vital for him to toe the line on a couple of these issues. But I think the Supreme Court's going to come to increasing focus as this goes forward, and that necessarily means a rise in the conversation, the volume of the conversation about cultural war issues, stuff that gets decided by the court.
Well, yes, sir.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first is more for pollsters. Does terror attacks benefit Trump in terms of the polls? The second one is if after the nomination, or even before, if Hillary Clinton gets indicted, what happens?
I'm not a pollster. I make TV ads, so deal.
Ironically, right now, it does, if you look at all the data, Trump has an advantage on being able to handle ISIS, being kind of tougher on terror. I think he does have a little bit of an advantage. It's Hillary's perceived as a steadier hand, is more experienced, but it's almost like Trump's kind of more like a father figure. He's stern. He's the disciplinarian, and Hillary were kind of more, some other figure, more, not coddling, but I mean just a little softer approach. And I think on the terror attacks, Americans are anxious, they're scared, and they want a strong approach. So I think it does give the slightest edge probably to Trump. And on the indictment issue, I don't think there's a chance in hell that she's going to be indicted before the election. That's just my opinion.
Okay. Who else? Come on. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know who this question would go out to, but I'll just throw it out there. So there have been a lot of people who were Bernie Sanders supporters that are very anti-Hillary. So the fact that he's now thrown his support behind Hillary Clinton.
I know.
Yeah, I know. How does this impact voters? I mean, because there's a lot of people that I talk to that say, well, I will not vote for Hillary Clinton, or I'll just write Mickey Mouse in the ballot box. Like I won't vote for any of them, for either, or who are they going to throw their support behind? So, just looking at the dynamics.
Jill Stein factor.
Well,
She's the Green Party nominee, and we're talking about Ralph Nader earlier. If she's getting 3-4%, guys, what does that mean?
Yeah, but I pointed to polls in 2000, exit polling in 2008, pretty regularly showed that people who supported Hillary Clinton said they would not support Barack Obama. I mean, there was one, I think in North Carolina, after that primary, 50% of Democratic primary voters said they would not vote for Barack Obama, those who supported Hillary Clinton. And guess who won in the fall? Right? So I think it's just, there's passion. It's coming out of a primary. These folks are very passionate about Bernie Sanders. But ultimately, their choice is a binary choice. No offense to Gary Johnson or Jill Stein, but it's going to likely be a binary choice. Are they going to vote for Donald Trump? Are they going to vote for Hillary Clinton? Or are they not going to vote? And my sense is they probably would vote for Hillary Clinton just not to vote against Donald Trump at the very least.
I think Steve's right. In 2008, there was a group post-primary ballot called PUMA, P-U-M-A, which stood for Party Unity, My Ass. And so the primary contest then was you could say more heated, and the number of people who came out then at the time so they would then vote for Obama was higher than it is now. So I think down the road, I think Bernie's already said that he doesn't expect to win the nomination, and that he is going to work very, very hard to defeat Donald Trump. That's going to have an impact on a lot of voters.
He's not quite there yet, though. Why didn't
Well, I think they're still working things out. I think the two campaigns are still working things out with the platform around trade, around fracking, around higher minimum wage, and so as those things get worked out, I think that down the road
Okay, we'll be there eventually. Yes, ma'am. Yellow. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. There are many people in the Republican Party that are hardcore Republicans that are not happy with Trump as their candidate, and there had been some talk. Yeah, heard that. There had been some talk at one time about a brokered convention. Do you know anything about that, or have any ideas?
Yeah, we were planning for the last 6 months to have the story of our lives, and it's been sadly taken from us. No. Every reporter's fantasy is that you have a contested convention where you go in not knowing who the nominee is going to be, and you've got all kinds of deals and betrayals that are taking place in smoke-filled rooms, and then you got fistfights on the convention floor and everything else. It's kind of
that we may have.
The throwback fantasy. There might be a modified version still. Yeah, so there's some talk about unbinding the delegates, as it's called, which would in effect let the delegates vote their conscience, pick who they want to pick, not be bound to what their state did during the course of the primary. Do I expect there to be some kind of move to bring that up? Yes. Do I expect it to fail? Yeah. So unless something dramatic happens between now and the convention, I don't think it's likely that they're going to take it from Trump. I've been struck by the degree to which the RNC has really thrown in Trump and made clear that they do not want this to happen, that they're going to protect him. I mean, they are, even while you see most lukewarm statements from party leaders, the RNC itself is wholeheartedly embracing Trump.
Yeah, I think part of that is, first of all, they don't want the chaos of a brokered or contested convention. That just is not a good look for the party. But secondly, I mean, the argument is 14 million voters voted for Trump. And so how do you say, well, 1,237 delegates are going to change the will of the voters? And I think Reince Priebus recognizes that this is about the voters. It's not just about the delegates. It's not just about the party, but it's about the actual voters.
That would be my next question.
And so the people we're talking to and the people that, yes, is there a group of people that are trying to stir stuff up? Absolutely. But it seems that the vast majority of delegates that are involved in this process are thinking about the good of the party.
But there's no obvious leader in waiting.
Well, that's a,
I mean, look,
no.
Right, to beat somebody, you have to have somebody, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, yes, with that hand shot straight up in the last row, yeah, in the third place.
Thank you. I try to get my news from
Multiple
different sources. And so I listen to XM 125, it's the Breitbart News Daily, and they have a lot of people that they're interviewing from overseas. And also I try to get my news from, more left-leaning places like CNN to try to get a balance so I can really understand what's going on in the world. And one of the things that has really struck me is the number of callers that are calling in talking about the immigration issues, and it doesn't sound xenophobic to me. It sounds like a genuine concern for the national security. And when you look at Brexit and you listen to all the callers that were coming into this radio station and what Breitbart on the internet was reporting, it seems pretty clear that a lot of the British people wanted Brexit. And then when it did pass, the American media seemed flabbergasted, like just completely shocked. And so I'm just wondering for you guys, where do you get your news? Do you just talk to each other in Washington and New York? Do you actually try to reach out and listen to what people are saying on alternative sites, like either listening to the radio shows, specifically Breitbart, because I think they've got a lot of great people that they interview. Do you listen to other talk radio? Do you read other websites to try to find out what's going on? Because I think that you can kind of get into a bubble and you don't really realize what the Heartland and the other people in the United States that aren't being so honest with the pollsters and what they think.
Well, nobody, I know voted for Brexit, so. There's a great old line from the 72 election where the film critic, or it was the film critic, for the New Yorker, Pauline Kael, said that she couldn't believe that Nixon won a landslide. After all, nobody I know voted for Nixon. It just spoke to what you're saying about the kind of island mentality of Manhattan. Look, is that a danger? Absolutely. Which is why it's important for us to leave the so-called Acela corridor and travel and talk to voters. I did that last month. I talked to a lot of people in the Raleigh, North Carolina area and found that there was contempt for both of these candidates that's off the charts. But I have to say, though, polling can actually be hugely helpful. And not necessarily just the horse race question of who's winning, but if you go deeper than that, that's the real value to me of polling, is to figure out what's happening in this country. Because you're right, people can be sort of less than forthright when it comes to who they're actually supporting. So you have to go look deeper in polls. Is there unease about immigration that owes to genuine economic questions? Absolutely, there's no question about that. I don't think anybody up here would question that. But I do think the polls tell us that while Trump has tapped into something that is real in this country, that there are a lot of people who are uncomfortable with what he's doing and saying as well. And those folks have a voice too. And that's why I think you see the kind of class and geographic divides when it comes to this race between Trump and
Well, I was going to say, I think most good political reporters don't just accept the inside the Beltway, New York, New York DC corridor sort of discussion. I mean, I think, you have to get outside of Washington. You have to understand what the rest of the country is thinking. And I think what's important, let's look at this race, right? You just talked to people inside Washington, strategists, people who work in this business, they don't like Clinton, they don't like Trump. So you're getting a lot of negative there, yet there's the rest of the country that's going to be voting for these two people. I think you've got to get outside, you've got to go to these places, you've got to find out what voters are really thinking about this and get away from these sort of conventional wisdom clouded sort of thinking that happens a lot inside Washington and New York.
And the other thing to think about, when we were first politicized, we first started voting, where do we get our information? NBC, CBS, ABC. That's it. And now you've got Republicans listening to Fox, the Democrats listening to MSNBC, BBC, etc. It is now, you listen to you get your news from a siloed news provider, and you're not exposed to other stuff out there. And I think that's a real danger. It's self-reinforcing for a lot of people that where they get their news, and they slant that news.
Yeah, I mean, there are precious few people who do what it sounds like you do, which is try to find an array of sources of information. Unfortunately, people have sort of siloed themselves off into these kind of ideological cul-de-sacs, and they seek information that reinforces their worldview. And I think that's in part why you see the polarization in this country when it comes to politics.
In terms of news consumption, I find I chiefly cover the White House, and what's happened to my news habits is that I read a really narrow band of issues, but in depth. So I'll read what many different outlets have to say about Syria, for example. So maybe I'm not reading about a ballot measure in a certain place, or maybe I'm not reading about the latest poll out of Utah or whatever, but I'm reading everything I can get. For example, right now I'm working on a story about Benghazi, and I'm reading everything I can find on the subject from multiple outlets. The first thing I did when Trump looked like he clinched the nomination was to search for anecdote, not data, anecdotes. I said on my Facebook page, hey, if you support Donald Trump, private message me, tell me why. I got a bunch of really interesting answers from people, most of whom would never ever said that on their public page. They private messaged me about it. It is really important to get out of that bubble. It's also important not to over-rely on that kind of anecdotal information. You've all read the pieces that say, well, my cab driver says. That's just not helpful. In terms of the
But polling's important, and data matters.
Right, that's right. But I think there's an interesting balance. We did a deep dive at Yahoo on, I think it was 12 or 15 Trump voters, full profile, name, age, geographical location, income, and the rest of it, to break through some of the stereotypes. In terms of xenophobia, I think that if you've got a candidate who says that most of the Mexican immigrants to this country are rapists and criminals, I think that is, by its very nature, a xenophobic statement. It's not backed up by data. They aren't mostly rapists and killers. It's just not. So that's where a lot of that comes from. And if you listen to the leaders of the Republican Party, they'll tell you that is a big source of their unease about his message.
Well, we'll do there, and then two more. All right, go ahead.
This question is directed at Mr. Knox.
Yep.
So in your mini biography, it says, ask Olivier about the shoe throwing.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. All right. How many people know what that refers to? All right. Well, smart. There are just enough people who did not raise their hands. I'm going to explain what happened. So President George W. Bush in 2008 did a sort of last tour of Iraq and Afghanistan. He was going to sign an agreement with the then Prime Minister of Iraq, Nur al-Maliki. And we were I traveled with the president over there when I was working for Agence France Presse. And we were awaiting a press conference between the Prime Minister. Actually, we were at a press conference with the President and the Prime Minister in one of the presidential palaces. And all of a sudden, a dark object sailed over our heads. President Bush very nimbly ducked out of the way. I think I can speak for the traveling press corps when our first response was, is that the kind of dark black object that goes boom? No, it was the kind of dark black object that smells of feet. What had happened was an Egyptian-born journalist, Muntazir al-Zaidi, who had been promising for months that if he were in the same room with George W. Bush, he would throw his shoes at him. Which is a big gesture of disrespect in Muslim cultures, had taken off his first shoe and hurled it at the President of the United States, who had ducked it. He then managed to take off his second shoe and hurl it at the President of the United States, who also ducked it. And it became the dominant news story out of this last trip, which was supposed to be about tying up loose ends, and instead ended up being about loosened shoelaces. So that's what that refers to. And you can look at the photos online and you'll see my, it's not even a double chin, it's a quadruple chin, but I'm doing one of these like.
So we got right here, but there's somebody in the back who I did. Was that you? Okay, I'll come next.
So you talked a little bit about 2016 not following the norms of recent elections. Historically speaking, can you think of an election in the United States that it might be closest to?
Neil, you want to go with that?
I'm at a loss.
I mean, I think in terms of, there really is no good comparison because Trump is a fairly angry figure in American history. The only person
the last nominee, the first nominee since Eisenhower,
Well,
has no political experience to get nominated.
and Eisenhower had a few important accomplishments in his time. Saving civilization.
There's a lot of precedent here.
Yeah, there's no precedent. I have two elections come to mind for me. The first is 1940, where Wendell Willkie.
You all remember 1940.
Neil was just starting out with Roper polling back then. He was an intern in that cycle. Oscar promised me he could work a rotary phone, man. He worked the rotary really good. 1940, where the Republicans nominated a New York City executive who was not necessarily known for his deeply held principles, by the name of Wendell Willkie, who pretended like he was a Hoosier, was born in Indiana, but he was living in Manhattan, running a utility, and it was really a remarkable campaign, and he had no ties whatsoever to the Republican Party, and there were a handful of powerful interests, including the Luce family, which of course ran Time of Life magazine, who sort of seized the nomination for him in effect. And that election was colored by what was happening in Europe and the rise of Hitler. And Willkie, unlike a lot of the Republican Party, was an internationalist who openly was sympathetic to American aid to Great Britain, and obviously lost to FDR pretty soundly. But he had no political experience, and so that comes to mind. And just in terms of a break from the kind of political consensus, I think 64, where the Republicans nominated Barry Goldwater, who was a real break from the kind of liberal consensus of the post-war period. The Republican Party had run what Goldwater called a dime-store New Deal. They were happy to accommodate the New Deal. They weren't trying to repeal Social Security anymore. And Goldwater came along talking about ending the TVA for crying out loud. Oh my gosh, I can't believe he actually said it out loud. And it was an unapologetic small government conservative. Pre-Sage, Reagan 16 years later kind of embraced that politics when it was more mainstream and more acceptable. But at the time, ideologically, it was far out of the mainstream. So I guess 40 and 64, but even those aren't that.
Many of you are educators. I think it's important because your students will be telling their kids about this election. This is that significant and it is that unique that we're going to be telling stories about this. Our kids and our grandkids will be telling stories about this for ages.
And it's either going to be an anomaly or it's going to be the turning point.
Where were you when Gary Johnson swept to victory?
We'll join afterwards. All right, yes, sir.
Our panel, I was looking at my news feed recently, and Donald Trump camp seems to be making a lot of internal changes to get rid of commanders. He started saying that individuals can start focusing on racial profiling. I'm going to stop the Muslim ban. If or when Donald Trump makes his pivot to be more moderate, do you think that's going to be enough to make the race more competitive, or do you believe that his initial abrasive approach has already stigmatized himself so much that it's not going to make any difference?
Well, the Hillary campaign is going to try to make darn for sure that he can't move away from some of those stances because they're going to rain down ads reminding voters of what he said earlier. But guys, do you think if Trump can sustain a move away from his kind of hardline stances that can help?
What's the evidence that he could?
Right, exactly. That's the question.
We're on like the 10th pivot, right? Like, what's the evidence? And also, does he?
We hope for history here.
Waiting for Pivot, I guess we have to say it. I mean,
the French guy that say Pivot, I love it.
Of course, good. I represent. There's just no evidence that he can do this. And he's promised repeatedly in public that he's now going to be more president. He's going to be so presidential, I'm tired of it. Or to you, there's just not much evidence that he can. So maybe the running mate helps him a little bit of that score, but only I think by stealing some of the news attention. I think
I'm not sure he has the discipline to do it. I think when you put him in a structured situation where he's reading off teleprompter, and he sounds like, wow, this is some interesting stuff. And then the same day, that's happened last week, where he then had a rally and it's just off the reservation. And it'd be interesting if he had a strategist to say, maybe I don't know, but I would think if you just told him, look, if you just keep your unfavorable numbers down, just where Hillary's are, or even lower, then you have a real chance. That might sink in, but I don't know.
The incidents are going to live on TV ads, and they're going to be, tens of millions of dollars to be spent to make sure that people remember, some of the insults and worse that he's made to Muslims, to women, to the disabled, and so forth. So I think probably it's hard task to try to get people to look beyond that.
There is nothing that's gone according to script so far. What the hell makes us think that the rest of it is going to? So look for a couple of inflection points. Look for the conventions, VP picks, and then what we're all going to watch is that first debate.
And do you guys think that they do 3 debates, more, less?
I mean, I think they sort of have to do 3, right? I mean, you sort of have to do that. It's the family tradition. Like, whoever decides to do less than that is going to be.
Yeah. All right, we got time for one last question here. Right there.
So you talked a little bit about how different news sources lean different ways and stuff, but I'd like to hear kind of what principles you each hold to when you're reporting. How do you write your articles? How do you phrase the things that you're going to say? Like, what do you have? Like, what do you hold to when you're reporting to the American people?
Well, hopefully I'm offering new information, either in terms of just facts or at least insight, breaking news, or at least breaking some kind of sort of new analytical point. And I try to infuse what I write with some sense of perspective as to what came before, and try to look at what this may tell us about where we're going. So looking back, looking ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's a universal difference between my old shop, which was covering the United States of the world, I find out, and my new shop, where at Yahoo, it's primarily an American audience. That's changed the way I write about things. I no longer have to say, let's see, I'm trying to give an example. Well, for a long time, we couldn't mention Newt Gingrich by name in our lead. It had to be President Bill Clinton's top Republican critic in Congress. So that has an impact on how you cover things, right? Because you got to be mindful that what you know is not necessarily what your audience knows. But yeah, new information obviously is paramount, or explaining an existing development in a way that your audience can really understand. I've got a lot more freedom now to be a little bit more, just bring a little bit more attitude. So if I want to, I can say, as I have, that calling the Obama administration calling itself the most transparent in history is like someone bragging that they're the most powerful croquet team in Juneau, Alaska. It's not a particularly relevant answer.
I always make sure that we try to provide a full context of every story that we use. I mean, Twitter now doesn't allow you to do that. Everything's a headline, and that's it. And people then start judging a story based on those 140 characters. I think it's very important to go past that and make sure you explain every part of the story to our viewers and our readers and our listeners, because otherwise then you're just contributing to misinformation or what can be unfair to either of these candidates. I think there's been a lot of that on both sides this year. Trump is, I think of an example last week with Trump, where there was story after story about how after his Federal Election Commission filings came out, that he was paying his own entities and his family's entities Well, the real context behind that is he legally has to do that. If you talk to anybody at the Federal Election Commission, it's illegal for a candidate to use an asset and not pay for it. It's considered an in-kind contribution. These are separate corporations, even though he does own them, he still has to reimburse them. And so that's why it's listed in his file. Yet the story about that was, oh, he spent X hundred thousands of dollars on his own family business.
And that's done by Twitter. But he is choosing to have events at his family-owned companies. Now, there's no question, legally, he's got to reimburse the facility for the costs incurred. But he's making the choice to have his events at Trump Soho or at Trump, around Country Club or whatever.
Which becomes a controversy when he starts pulling in money from outside. But when he's spending his own money, he's really just sort of shuffling his own money around. And I think it was, at least on the Democratic side, they were making huge hay of this issue as what a scandal this is. It hasn't reached scandal proportions yet until he starts spending others' money on his own stuff. And you can make the point, well, maybe there's something weird here.
And that's done on Twitter, but so the people on this panel, I would trust them if they quoted something on Twitter, but by and large, I don't trust quotes on Twitter, and I don't trust the first version of the story. I'll give you another example. A Twitter thunderstorm about how Donald Trump doesn't know who Boris Johnson is. It's not what he said. It's not what he said. He clearly knew who Boris Johnson was. He didn't know what Brexit was a few months ago. I don't care. The Twitter stuff about him not knowing who Boris Johnson was, he said was, I don't know him, meaning I don't have a personal relationship with him. And yet Twitter, and part of our profession, went crazy with it. It's like, oh my God, Donald Trump doesn't even know who Boris Johnson is. So care. It doesn't serve you well to be first if you're also first with the correction.
Right. And establish trusted sources of news and go to people and institutions. There are a few great institutions, and there are people in this country who really care about this stuff, and I think we're doing a good job trying to be honest about what's happening in politics and rely on it. So follow those sources. In closing, we echo something that Neil said, which is you guys are going to tell your kids and your grandkids and your students about this election for years to come. If not always edifying, definitely always memorable and eventful. Thank you all so much for coming and for having us here at Mount Vernon. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much. That was really fantastic. I'm a professor of history, and I'm going to get my pound of flesh.
Oh my gosh! Overtime.
The teachers here about thinking about elections. Look at the elections from 100 years ago, 108 years ago. Look at William Randolph Hearst, the inventor of yellow journalism, having the majority of the delegates going into the Democratic National Convention and then not getting it. I mean, you had the personalities, Teddy Roosevelt, the Bull Moose run. I mean, that 100 and odd years ago, those elections in the early 20th century were really crazy too. And Hearst basically created the war with Spain. Remember the Maine? I mean, Hearst is a outsized, crazy personality. William also Randolph Hearst, and the Citizen Kane movie that's based on his life. So that could be the Trump movie.
It's true. I've actually thought about Hearst a lot during this campaign because this outsized New York sort of celebrity, mogul, and sort of man about town who really wanted to be a bigger figure than just the kind of New York media figure that he was. And, he wanted to be a leader of men. There's a great book about her, by the way, by David Nassau, N-A-S-A-W, who also wrote about her, who sort of Kennedy as World War III.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, thank you so much. Wasn't that fantastic? Did you want to say something?
Thank you again to the panelists. Thank you for everyone for coming. The Leadership Fellows, thank you for being here. Lunch is right outside. Teachers will be back here at 12:30.
Yeah.
Great crowd, great questions. Yeah, you guys did a great job. Let me thank.
So you're doing interesting dichotomy between the way Hillary and Trump.
Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. That was a lot of fun.